very much, Kylie. Right, okay, so I'll quickly start with an introduction of our panel members. So in no particular order, except that they're in the order I can see on my screen. We have Dr. Tim Payne, who gave us a presentation on DevOps and what is involved in DevOps in terms of the changes you need to make in an organization in order to facilitate that. At a very high level, that's what this presentation was about. Included an awful lot of stuff in there about the pros and cons of different approaches and the effect that it has on the people and what they need to get into their heads to come along on that journey, which kind of creates quite kind of a part of our theme. So the next person I have on the screen here is Chris. So Chris provided a very good presentation. Again, so you've got psychological in your title for your presentation, Chris, about Guildcraft and the implementation of the concept of guilds as a loose organizational structure, with a strong counterpoint to the idea of formalized organizational structures, such as what you get in businesses, charities, governmental bodies, that kind of thing, and how the two can complement each other. I thank you very much for that, Chris. There's a lot of high praise of guild-like communities, including stating that professional bodies, such as the BCS, count as guilds and are making very essential and useful gains to our society. Particularly all of your examples are more around nursing rather than the BCS, but we can work with that. Okay, so next we have Victoria, Vic or Vicky or however I feel like referring to in the next sentence, it would appear.
Whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Which I think is a very good way of summarizing the presentation that you gave.
Yes.
Whatever makes you feel comfortable, I think is quite a nice way to put it. So you've got humanize in your title there, again, taking on this very sort of psychological, emotional and human people element to the theme there. And you were talking about how that affects in the way you run projects, organizational structures, and the effects in terms of outputs that you can get from that. So not just talking about, shall we say, how and why to care from people. There was a bit of a bottom line element that was brought into that, which kind of helps to make it real within a business or professional organizational context. And then, of course, yes, we have Elena, who gave us our keynote to bring in a marketing perspective, which again focused very much on people aspects and about making sure that what we are providing is suitable for the people who are looking to consume it, and brought sort of a lot of the ideas that have come from the development of marketing over the last sort of 50 to 100 years, and how that applies. We're giving some good examples as well from the service management perspective. So that's our members. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to proceed to some of the questions that we've been provided through the Slido question platform. So some of these have got some nice sort of, shall we say, combativeness built into it. So I'm going to start with something that's a bit more general, and I know you guys have covered this a little bit already. So what I'll do is I'll just do a round table and let you all provide your own answer on this. So here the question is, creating and designing automated solutions is very tech and data focused. What do we need to do to ensure that we don't get lost in the tech and focus on value? So what I'll do as a starting point, I'll give some of the tech people a start on this. I'm going to give that to you as a starting point, Chris. Chris, we can't hear you. You appear to be on mute.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of avoiding going into the tech too much, I think it's to understanding really. There's loads of angles here, particularly with things like, I won't talk around DevOps, Tim, because I know you're going to cover that, but anything that's around automation that involves transformation. The issue is you've got technology coming in, that's maybe displacing things that people are doing manually. That then means that there's the tech angle, but there's also the transformation angle, but there's also a displacement. We're actually displacing something. It's not like we're just creating something new. We're actually, in some cases, we're displacing something old. We then have to try and understand how that plays out on the human level. So I think it's very, very important that we understand that while it might be a pain to patch servers and we can automate it or remove it if we're using PaaS or SaaS, maybe if some people like patching servers or they understand how to patch servers, maybe they have the potential to learn how to do some Terraform automation. But you know, we need to take that into consideration because we need to take people with us on this journey. And I think this is something that I am very passionate about and have struggled with in the past, but it's very important that we don't just do stuff. We actually look at the impact and look at if it impacts other people. We need to look at some way of ensuring that they have agency in that conversation, and there's options around, you know, retraining or you know, something that means they're still part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. And Tim, I'll bounce this on to you next.
Okay, so my answer to this is very simple. People are resources that have intelligence and brains and will to use them. Would I want to take a person and get that person to do something repetitive all the time, or would I want to get that person and give him the opportunity to do something productive? So my answer would be, you're using the automation to make sure that the person can actually invest in doing something useful. Rather than just doing repetitive tasks, you can basically take the repetitive tasks, you can automate that, and then you can invest that person's time in doing something that they want to do, that's something proactive and then gives value to your organization. The main challenges that we've had with sort of looking at doing automation at companies like IKEA, if I can mention them, was that you had lots of people doing, you know, lots of high paid people, lots of specialist people doing basically bummy jobs, you know, just deploying things and finding out why deployments hadn't worked. And you were paying those people lots of money to effectively do silly things, you know, go and investigate something on an environment. There were other uses for those people's time, other more productive uses for those people's time. So the challenge was, let's automate what is basically can be automated, and then let those people actually do something that gives more value to the organization that then is just basically simply repeating everything that they probably could do in their sleep. And that would be basically where I'd see automation coming in. It's basically empowering people to invest in themselves and invest in actually delivering value to the organization rather than just doing repetitive tasks all the time.
Okay, so Victoria, just to give you a quick repeat, what do we need to do to ensure we don't get lost in the tech and focus on value?
So I'm just going to mirror pretty much what Chris says. You know, it is about the human beings. And the truth of the matter is, before automation came in, humans were doing that work. And what we need to remember is that there are processes that the humans put into place that the automation is pretty much either going to copy or make better or even more seamless. But it still comes down to the human beings. So you need to make sure that, so for example, I'm not a techie, but if you come up with an idea around automation and you have a problem to solve, you're going to come up with a sequence of activities that need to work, that need to be able to click all the way through. Then you need to test it. The only way to test it is based in mind, you have to go to a human who initially did that kind of work, and you go, so what did you do? And what problems did you come across? And what worked well? What didn't work well? It still comes down to the human elements. And whatever happens, you need to remember as well that the end product of that automation is going to be consumed by a human being. So again, you need to be thinking of the human elements as well. So as much as technology is amazing and you can come up with some fascinating, you know, inventions and innovations, humans were here first. And we were doing those pieces of work initially, and we're going to consume that service later on. So whatever Amazon do in their warehouse with their automation and whatever IKEA do, I'm going to be the end consumer. So I need to be considered. Thank you.
Excellent.
Can I come back on that one just based on your answer, Victoria? I think something else we need to throw into the mix is it's actually also about identity. And one of the problems with automation is that in some cases we might inadvertently be actually creating some sort of identity conflict, culture war. The people with stickers on their laptops and the people without stickers on their laptops. It would be a shame if automation and DevOps and things like that meant it was a stickers on a Mac versus no stickers on a ThinkPad. Because I've seen the possibility for that happening.
Very interesting. Okay, so Elena, what do we need to do to ensure we don't get lost in the tech and focus on value?
Well, probably, as you could have seen from my presentation, in marketing, we really took great advantage of technology because what took years, for example, marketing analytics took years to comply before, and it took years of research and questionnaires and focus groups and so on. So nowadays, a lot of this information can just be collected even without a click of the button. There are automated solutions for that, and I think the job became much easier, and targeting, positioning, all this became really easy. But also, we also realized that we are under threat of reducing people to numbers and segments, which are a little bit impersonal and kind of inhumane. So we realized that in digital marketing too, and now we are coming up with the concepts of persona. So trying to go back to human beings and at least try to imagine the person behind all these segments, for example, demographics, age, family status, income. Yeah, so we're going back from numbers to actual human beings. But yes, we're using technology in order to build that too. So I would say it is important to see the human being behind it and also initiate the dialogue to understand the behavior behind the numbers. But analytics at the same time is becoming more and more important. So it's kind of always a very delicate balance in marketing too, by seeing people and seeing numbers. Yeah.
So if I can just add, basically my sort of summary for this is really that you're using technology as an enabler to allow other people to do something more creative. Because, people, if you give them some time, freedom to actually go off and do either, look for analytics or look for different patterns within data, or actually think about how they can automate things and how they can test things in different ways. If you automate everything that can be automated, that's repetitive in nature, that basically automation does, or technology can do better, then it gives people the freedom to actually go off and say, all right, we need to identify different patterns. So I'll look at the data in different ways, or I need to automate, I need to write different type of tests. So I'll go off and create those new processes, create those new test patterns. It gives them the ability to do all the time to do that. And they're not focusing more on doing those operational tasks that they have to do as part of their current job.
Yes, right. And it also increases the relevance of conversations because we can target it very precisely to people's interests too. So, I mean, of course, there are mistakes in there, but quite often, it's supposedly to help in the ideal world, but and it does help in some situations. So
Sorry, you raised your hand. Do you want to jump in?
I did. I try and use my hand where I can. So I was just going to agree with what Tim was saying. I love the idea of automation allowing for people to be more creative, but it's whether or not there is a strategy for that to happen, because that doesn't always happen. That's not always the case. It may be the intention, but it's like, how do we make sure that that happens? Because creativity isn't something that's acknowledged a lot in the corporate world, and actually it should be. because that's the gap, and that's why we have so much mental health. That's why we have so many degenerative diseases, because people are not connecting to their creativity. So it's a great idea. It's a great vision to be looking at, but we also need to be looking at how to make sure that that becomes a reality. Because I've worked in the corporate world for 20 years, and I've never had anybody who's wanted to tap into my creativity. And yet the people I've tapped into their creativity are now just completely transforming the corporate world in their own little way. So again, where do we find the balance? It's a conversation that I think we should be having.
So Victoria, that says to me that we need to, or companies need to, and organisations need to spend time awakening the creative urge in their employees, because we're almost, particularly in, say, in operations, some of the roles that would be automated, they're not necessarily known for their creativity. But that, but to your point, Victoria, people are doing those roles, are creative, but maybe they're a bit rusty. So we need to stimulate and wake that up somewhat.
Yeah, so it's not even about being rusty. It's just that you're dead to your creativity because you don't even know what that is. Like, prior to about 5 years ago, I didn't know what creative was. And I think I'd tell anybody who would listen to me that I wasn't a creative person. And yet I ended up opening my own food company. And now I go and teach other companies how to allow people to connect to their own creativity. It goes back to this one of the slides that I presented 2 days ago. Everything seems to be blended into one now, time-wise. But when you're born, you were born with a genius. And it's whether or not that genius is discovered. That's why you'll see on YouTube, you'll see a 3-year-old child playing a piano. You're like, how the hell did that happen? Or a kid who's got an amazing memory. That they were born with that. They don't have the capacity to be taught that at that age. They've got it, and maybe it may be just enhanced a bit. And then you get the job that you have, which is your primary talent, which you're good at, hopefully, and you get paid for it. And in some cases, you get paid handsomely for it. And then you get the secondary role, which is, well, if all else fails, I'll do that one. The genius one is that we need to be getting people to have, because that's what's going to save companies money. And that's actually what's going to make companies money. So you may have somebody who is a data entry processor, for example, but they may be very good at, let's say, just networking and schmoozing people and creating deals. But yet you've got that person, data entering. And what does happen is that if you find an automated way to enter data, I can guarantee you that you're not going to be asking that person, well, what are your strongest skills? What comes to you naturally? You're going to sideline that person to another job that can't be automated, and then their genius dies with them. And that's why the graveyard is one of the richest places on the earth, because a lot of us die with our genius. It's true.
So we've got a couple of comments coming through on the chat. So Richard, can you spot them? Would you like me to read them out?
Yes, I can see we've got some of these coming through. So, latest one. Creativity and strategy will eventually be the only irreplaceable contributions humans will be able to make that cannot be done better than AI. Those will be the most important inputs. I think creativity will become the most sought after skill sooner than we realize. And my personal experience of this is matching this. Actually, I've been working on some automation projects with some companies, one of which is a Swedish-based company. So maybe it's more of a Swedish thing. I don't know. But the reason that we're working on an automation project is precisely to remove exactly what you've been talking about, Tim, those repetitive tasks from people's roles, to provide them with the ability to work on things which require their skill sets, their imagination, and their ability to be dynamic as a human compared to their ability to being robotic. It's much more error prone when you're asking them to be robotic. So, people make mistakes and then they feel bad, and then, they naturally there's some kind of pressure which builds back on them to say, well, you shouldn't be making the mistakes because you want to reduce the error rate. And that can be done obviously in better and worse ways. But if you can eliminate that, so that's the main driver behind their desire to automate, is actually to increase people's agency and to increase their potential.
Yeah, a couple of points on that. So this reminds me of a famous Jeff Bezos quote, which is, at the end of the day, all a company has is its agility, because everything else can be understood and copied by competitors. So, and again, the agility, creativity is in there. So that's the first point. The second one is that errors, there's a little bit of a paradox here, because we want automation to reduce errors, but actually making mistakes is part of the very important part of the creative process, as Victoria knows. So it's there's a bit of a paradox here. We want to effectively build some stuff using our creativity, making mistakes along the way, because that's the creative process, to create a machine that makes less mistakes than people doing things manually. So I think the other thing that we need to do when we're setting our sights higher and delivering more value is also understand more about the actual creative process, the design thinking process, how we move through fast prototyping, minimum viable product, all of these sorts of things. So we understand that we need both the reductive elements of the thinking, that creates the meticulous code that does something, and also the more expansive things where we're setting our sights high. And we need to understand that process. That a lot of people around that are in the innovation space, drug companies, everything, they know that, but it's like in the operational space, we need to be starting to think like that too.
I'll slightly disagree with Chris there, mainly because by the time you actually get to a point where you can automate it, you'll have done all the mistakes at that point anyway, because you'll have the thing documented to such a point that hopefully the mistakes will have already been sort of gone through. So by the time you're automating it, basically you're just being in robotic mode anyway. So yeah, hopefully by going through that point to get it to the robotic mode, you'll have made all the mistakes and you'll have done all the creative thinking. So I think really it's allowing people to then go on to do something more creative, which was the second point that Chris was making. Fully agree with that.
Yeah, that's right. If we're not making mistakes, we're not trying hard enough.
I was going to say that's certainly matching to what's going on with mine experience at the moment. It's removing that shall we say the unwanted error. Just thinking in terms of the example of Amazon there, you don't want Amazon to be sending packages to the wrong address, even though you've given them the right address, just because they're being creative. It's not in that area where you want that kind of mistake coming in. It's more where you want the automation to kick in. Sorry, Victoria, you had something to add on to that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim, you go ahead, because I think you were going to link into what was said, and then I'll follow you. Yeah,
well, actually, what I was just going to say is we've spent half an hour on one question. And interesting though the question is, I'm sure there are others, and it might be better to because I think we're basically doing circular arguments. It might be better to sort of move on to some other questions to bring some fresh.
So we will once I finish this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. I think what we just need to understand is that are we choosing automation over humans? We need to when we're talking about this, we need to realize that yes, automation is amazing, but we need to be very careful how we implement it. And if it's at the cost of humans, then we need to think twice. Yes, I don't want somebody sending me the wrong address, but I also would like in my company for the best people who creatively are meant to be doing the jobs that they're doing to do those jobs, because I know I'll get more out of that. So if you're the best person to be a project manager and it's your calling, then why shouldn't you be a project manager? I wouldn't want that to be automated. So we need to be very careful how we implement automation and try not to get rid of the human race whilst we're at it.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. So moving on to a slightly more combative question. So we have a question here. Technology teams are used to replacing business colleagues with code and with databases. But is there a natural resistance to replacing their own team members?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was just going to say the same.
Certainly. Okay, so the question, technology teams are used to replacing business colleagues with code and databases. So shall we say IT automating bits of the sales operations or something like this, right? but is there a natural resistance to replacing their own team members? So
Yes.
IT or automating out IT?
Yes, there is. So again, this is something I've seen happen before. I think the challenge is then that automation can often mean jumping up the abstraction layers. It can mean maybe some really sophisticated work for some very highly skilled people to automate it that then abstracts away some of the complexity. Now, the thing is that the IT, my view is that IT is almost it's a fairly immature industry. People like to knock things up and have a go. You know, that's how most people get into technology, and many times people do that throughout their working life. They try new things, they knock things up, they have a go. Automation and abstraction done properly is saying, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to really crack that problem. And yes, I think that is a big challenge, you know, Richard, for the question, that a lot of the time the developers don't realize that a lot of the things that they're building can actually be automated away completely by maybe a more skilled developer. And then the issue is that you've got challenges, all sorts of challenges, including it's almost maybe some of it can become almost a winner takes all, where you get a very highly skilled person that needs to build certain aspects of automation that then takes away some of the fun and even the creativity to some extent, Victoria, from the others. So that is one of the challenges of computing more generally. And people will, whether they're in the business or whether they're in IT, they're going to try and hang on to what they know and then push it as far as they can. The idea of just dispensing with it and saying, well, we're not going to do that anymore, it's a very hard psychological trick to master.
I would just say there's always things to automate.
and you know what? And automation is fun. I mean, I use a tool at the moment called Kartra, and it's amazing. You know, it takes all my clients and puts them into one whole company, and it sends out all the emails to them. It's wonderful to watch. But I know that I personally, I don't like sending out emails. So it's no, what's the word? It's no demise to any of my creativity. Does that make sense? And so it's like, to me, it's great that I've got an automation. But in answer to your question, I think it's going to become easier to get rid of your team members now that we've gone through the pandemic, because we're losing the human touch. You know, before you would spend 12 hours and sometimes more. If when Kylie and I used to work together, we would get into work and work together and go to the pub and everything else. And you spend so long with each other that if somebody came to me and said, well, you need to get rid of Kylie, or, you know, in space of automation, I'd be like, oh, do I have to? So I would be reluctant. But if I haven't got that connection with you, if I don't have that affinity with you, then as far as I'm concerned, you're just a number. So the connection isn't there. So I think that the more we experience these times, the easier it's going to be to replace.
Okay.
Can people also crave human connection? Like, I can give example from the student life, yeah, because I'm a lecturer. So there was a lot of talk through the pandemics. Oh, now we're going to be replaced and we'll become these talking heads and on the screen, yeah, instead of live lecturers. But actually, what happened was that students were often offered options at the beginning of the year to do it online or live, and students were begging to have more and more and more live classes. They really craved connection there, and there is, what I feel is this kind of return, and people are looking to go back. So maybe there is something positive coming from all of the kind of live connection is increasing in value. I don't know, that's just an observation.
I'm sure it's not all doom and gloom, Elena. I'm sure it's not and stuff. There are people who definitely want to go back, but compared to, there's also a lot of people who want to stay at home as well. So the ones that will do that. But I think if more people decide to stay away from that human connection, it's going to be a lot easier for them to make those mistakes.
So Richard, just kind of to riff on the question a bit more, what's required then, particularly for, say, technical people who aren't thinking of displacing their own work, is we actually need to move people on. We all need to move on, and that means learning. So actually learning and development is a very, very important part of automation, because once we've automated, we don't need to do that anymore in the same way. So we have to learn a different way of doing it, and we have to learn a new thing to do, a new way to apply our creativity and our ideas. So actually learning and personal transformation will be a far greater of far greater importance in the future.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question that's come in on our chat, which I quite like here. Do we think machine learning will lead to machines making better decisions than humans when it comes to business critical decisions?
Ultimately, yes, I think it will. But I think it's got a long way to go.
Yeah,
I would say define better. Are those more optimal decisions? And yeah, probably yes, from the logical optimal point of view. But will they be better in terms of adaptation, in terms of taking into account other humans? Yeah, just a question.
Yeah, it'll also depend on the actual type of question that you're trying to answer.
exactly. Yeah, I think it depends how emotional or how emotive the question is, you know. When you talk about business decisions on behalf of who, a human being, to benefit who, even if it's just making money, it's still a human being. So I think it goes back to the making of the mistakes. So you're going to have to trial and test this as opposed to getting it right first time. But then again, humans are the same, you know. We make decisions, and sometimes we make decisions that work out, and sometimes we make decisions that we think, you know what, we could have done better. So I wouldn't want a machine determining my business, I can tell you that. I would always want to be able to review that. And I think it's going to take a long time, a bit like what Tim says. It's going to take a long time for you to actually be able to trust the decision of a machine. So if a machine makes a decision, are you going to actually go, I trust it completely, I don't need to review it? Or are you going to go, actually, it's made a decision, but let's just make sure we're clear? And then you feel that then it's all pretty much, you're almost like double laboring the decision, if that makes sense. So I think it's going to take a long time, but I know I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want it, that kind of decision for me.
Well, I mean, DSS. Oh, sorry, Kelly. Do you want to go forth? I've already chatted.
That's fine. I feel like we're seeing this play out in social media. If we think about what's happening with Facebook particularly, Facebook effectively has automated a lot of decisions about what is acceptable on their platform, who's able to post, what gets banned, who sees what. And I think what we're seeing is something very interesting happening, which is that we still need people to set the parameters of what is acceptable and how that automation runs. So if we think about Facebook, they've tried to do that with their committee of the great and the good, who ultimately sort of hear appeals and things like that. But I think we're also probably going to have a lot more involvement from governments to start laying out the parameters. And I think those parameters need to be laid out in laws. You know, we've got a lot of laws at the moment that consider, anti-discrimination laws, etc. So we need to actually, I think where we are going to go is we're going to actually have to see how we apply both existing laws and then also be a lot more explicit about what is acceptable as a society and create new laws about what Facebook can automate and present and that sort of thing, and then start applying them. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it happens. I think it will happen. And the reason I think that is because we've already been through this. If you go back to the media in the 19th century, it was a free-for-all. It was a fact-free media. You know, it was post-fact. And then we applied a lens that said, if you're in a media, we're going to control you, and you have to be facts, you have to be able to back it up, you have to apologize if you get something wrong. And I think social media has just escaped that boundary that was imposed upon the media, but I think it will be reimposed for precisely the same reasons that those boundaries were imposed on print media, radio media, and television in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, Jaron Lanier talks about this a lot, and he talks about one of the challenges then is to do with some of the root causes of this. It's not necessarily the fault with the algorithm sometimes. It's the fact that a lot of these companies get their money through ad revenue, and therefore, you know, all of the things that are unacceptable turns out and makes them a lot of money. So I think there's some fundamentals there. So I think ethics, I think the whole area of ethics, I think becomes, you know, and law ultimately, sanctions becomes more important in, you know, and I think that will I'm expecting, you know, whether it's to do with the climate agenda or social media, I'm expecting this ethical angle to kind of get louder and louder and louder and louder.
So I'll just go back to the question. We've had decision support systems around with us for many, many years. And basically all machine learning is just a more refined version of a decision support system. So basically all we're doing is we're putting, being able to get big learning to give us more options when we consider decisions. But I still see the ultimate decision as being made by the person. It's just that the AI is just giving us more options and more considered options that we may not have seen ourselves.
Well, it sort of depends. I mean, if you take Google DeepMind and AlphaGo, it's not reliant on any humans. And in fact, when they trained it initially, where it beat an a world champion, they used supervised learning. So they basically used human training data. Then the scary thing is though, Tim, they retrained it from tabula rasa using reinforcement learning, so no human input. It just played itself just from the basic rules of the game, and it absolutely crucified the thing that the previous version of their own program, and it could outplay it within 4 hours, and within a day it was like a kind of alien god sort of. It actually reinvented the game of Go. The tactics were beyond human comprehension. So I think it's actually, I think an aspect of it is maybe constrained in the way that you've described, but I think the scope is actually very much broader in some other cases.
Yeah, but the point I was trying to make was that ultimately, if it's a business decision and you want control over that business decision, then it's your decision. So the DSS is there to basically give you options, but whether you choose that option or use it is up to you. I mean, if you let loose and say, yes, okay, I'm going to hand the authority over the machine to make the decision for you, then, you know, that's your option. But the way I view it is, if it's a critical business decision, I would want to take the decision.
Yeah, I think it's interesting there, the scope of what it is there. So the question wasn't defining exactly what kind of decisions, and to your point, Elena, what is actually better. You know, Victoria, you spoke quite a lot about how you deal with people and their emotions, and, you know, Chris, you're talking about people's sense of agency. And if your better is just to improve your bottom line, then you may not be ticking the boxes on those things. Whereas if you look at people from a more holistic perspective and say that's the most important thing, whereas with Go, you're looking at something that's purely logical. It's a completely contained, although it's very complicated, it's a completely contained field, and the only objective is to win, right? There isn't extra things. We don't need to worry about the emotions of the person that we're beating, and make sure we beat them in a nicer way that enables them to do something better tomorrow, right? That's not part of what the goals of the objectives. I think they're sort of coming out from quite a lot of you is objective setting and understanding what it is we're attempting to achieve. Is a very important thing there. And we've got some comments coming through here. We have from Marilyn, need humans to reason or apply thought judgment with respect to Facebook, not always a black and white decision in every part of the process. We've also got some comments there about recordings. So yes, we will be providing recordings for the missed sessions for anyone who needs to catch up. Okay, so just on here, we have another question here, which is a bit more, should we say, pragmatic, technical side of things. What are the parts of information services organization where automation is easier to apply effectively?
I mean, maybe the areas that are the least politically controversial. I mean, that can often be a good angle. You know, if there's something that is just like grunt work that people don't like doing, and there's no real political capital in owning it, then things like robotic process automation, I think, is a really interesting idea where people can get some immediate business value in short terms, in contact centers and places like that, by just kind of automating some things to just make the customer and the agent's life easier. So things like that are obvious quick wins. Like operational automation has got more of a political angle. It's also got a little bit of a political and identity dimension. But there's nobody really in the contact center who's they're under so much pressure to reduce handling time. Typically, the idea of them saying, "Here's a tool, it'll save you, it'll save you a minute a call. Do you want it?" Everybody's going to say yes. So that's my angle.
And I would say any robotic or any task-based sort of operation, any operational thing or task-based function, I would say would be a good candidate for automation.
I'm quite fascinated by the concept of choice architecture and nudge theory, where we actually build our automation and we build the technology presentation layer to implement guide rails and guardrails that actually help people within an organization make the decisions that will benefit that organization, but while at the same time still allowing them to actually say, no, the preferred choices that you've given me aren't going to work for this scenario, so therefore I want to be able to do something that's a bit more bespoke. But I think there's actually a lot of control areas, so information security, IT asset management, etc., where actually we want to put in place guardrails and guide choice while still recognizing that sometimes other people may have a better way of doing things, or they may have a different requirement from what is our preferred requirement for them. And I think actually that's something that we should, as IT asset managers, we need to be exploring a lot more, but I think it also applies across the board to all areas of service management.
I think areas where you've got sort of conformity, or you have to enforce conformity for configuration drift or legal reasons, security reasons, I think setting up guardrails and automating those guardrails and making them enforced is probably, as Kylie was saying, a good idea.
That's actually a prerequisite, isn't it, to things like autonomy and decentralization as well. If people want to look at those, ways of organizing, then there's got to be some like red lines that you don't cross. Well, how do you determine that? Or some danger, flashing warning light. How do you do that? Well, you have to automate that, or else you've just got a manual process. And so yeah, completely agree, Kylie.
And I think it's really interesting, Chris, your talk, and also Nigel, who's not here tonight. The talks have been so focused on people and the need to, sort of working in small, fairly self-organizing groups. And that's also the essence, Tim, of DevOps as well, isn't it, in many ways, and agile. And yet actually we all recognize that automation can be a very powerful tool to allowing all of those groups to be, I guess, marching towards the same light in the distance and achieving organizational value in its broadest sense, rather than everybody going off and doing their own thing and being disparate. Actually, automation can be quite powerful in marshalling the troops, so to speak, and getting everybody marching in the same direction, even though they're doing it within their small autonomous units that are very close to the people to whom they are providing the value.
Okay, and so some of the what we've just been discussing there sort of dovetails into this is probably one of the last questions we have here. This is about someone's posted here to Stephen's point about automation de-skilling people in cybersecurity. So is this a broader issue behind security? And I think I'll extend that question as well about just a broader issue of de-skilling in general.
I think, well, for looking at cybersecurity, I'm not an expert in cybersecurity, but I do some of it. Basically, the threat agents are always changing the ways of attack. So there's never going to be a time when there isn't going to be a new variant out there that you have to deal with. So I think as long as the people who are doing the attacks are being creative, then the people who are doing the defending also need to be creative. So you can automate for some of it, but you're never going to get rid of that creative element.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you look at the offense rather than the defense of cybersecurity, you can see the criminals are really into automation in a big way, aren't they, Tim?
Yeah.
So there's got to be a clue there for all of us. You know, you pretty much got cryptojacking as a service you can hire, can't you, by the hour, complete with customer telephone support if you need it. So actually they're like way ahead. So yeah, it's going to have to be automated. And I suppose the good news, if people are worried about being de-skilled in cybersecurity, somebody's going to find, you know, until we've got like widespread quantum computing, people, and even then, people are going to always find a way of, you know, the next zero-day exploit. And, you know, there's always, unfortunately, there's always going to be a new problem to worry about. So anything we can do to automate in that space is important. But I'd like to go back to my previous point of probably 20 minutes ago. I do worry that there is a little bit of a winner takes all potential here, where maybe we need to be teaching the skills of automation more readily to avoid just having some highly skilled people doing all the automation and just like taking out the opportunities for other people. So I think we need to grow as a profession to bring more people, you know, so they can get onto the first rung of the ladder and build up their skill sets.
We have a comment here that's come in. So it says, the theme is asking us to consider, can we automate value? Value is personal in some ways. I value time. So if a process like internet or mobile banking means I don't walk down the road and queue for 10 minutes, I'll choose to give my time for something creative, which I value. I would personally echo that. I always hated going into banks and then suddenly realized I hadn't been to one in 10 years. Hadn't missed it in the slightest. Definitely was very happy with what the banks had done in enabling me to not have to go through that process. Although I realize that that's not necessarily for everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this is where value as something very, very personal is really shown up, because older people who have access issues, or, you know, who can't access, you know, digital technology for whatever reason, they really value having branches that they can go and talk to somebody face to face and, you know, have that value laden conversation. You know, I get sick and tired of typing stuff out and just want to have you know, you can be backwards and forwards a million times, and you know that if you just spoke to somebody that it would just get sorted. So yeah, absolutely, it's a really good example of just value as person, you know, something that is individual.
Yeah, you literally took the words out of my mouth, Kylie, about, you know, the elderly and stuff. I mean, right now we're young, we're agile, we want to run, we're all on the go, but then you think of the person who's just retired and feels as if they've lost the meaning of life, and their main access of conversation is by going to you know, the bank and saying, oh, how are you? You know, and we forget that, because in this generation, we're still young. When we get older, it's going to mean a lot more. But there's also the fact that, yes, I'm always on the run as well. So I don't like waiting in a bank queue. But I get really, really annoyed when I want to speak to somebody in the bank and all I get is press 1, press 2, press 3, because I want to speak to a human being and get it sorted. And this is the thing, it's like, where do we draw the line of automation, or where does it begin and where does it end? And I think we're just going to have to realize that the way the world is going, some automation is going to work and some isn't. But for me, that human connection is really important. And I come back to the whole mental health thing. I know people who have literally got Alzheimer's because they've not been able to speak to people. Their access has been reduced and they feel lonely, or they've committed suicide. And at the end of the day, you realize that it's not, the automation isn't always all good. Again, right now, at this age, I'm on the go, I'm rushing, I want to save time. But it's not always going to be like that in my life. At some point, I'm going to want to be that person who somebody says, how are you, Vic? How are you doing? How are you feeling today? And if all I've got is a machine to deal with that, I'm scared about what could happen. So we need to be able to find a balance. And Chris talked about, learning. I talk about mindset. We need to re-educate ourselves, because right now, the person who's earning 100, 200 grand a year and making the money, they're probably thinking, sod that, I just want to make my money and go. But at the end of the day, pray God that you stay on that 200 grand or save enough, or that your income stays the same, so that you don't end up being that person who has to go to a food bank. And that's what's happening right now. And if you're going to a food bank and you're needing somebody to say, how are you? And you're looking at a machine, you're screwed.
So the issue then we've got, Victoria, is that in the developed world, birth rates are declining. So the thing is, there aren't enough people who are going to ask that how are you question in the next, over the next 20, 30 years. The numbers are diminishing. So it needs to be, either it needs to be automation, or we need to have some other solution. But that's the reality. I mean, that's one of the challenges. That Japan is very famous for introducing those automation elements of elderly care, because they just don't have enough young people.
But that's what I'm talking about. Rather than learning, it's also about mindset. So it's about, I think we agree, there needs to be a form of education so that the people who are alive can support the others who are alive. And automation isn't going anywhere. It's actually flying in, right? If you look at the rate of development right now, and again, I'm not a techie, I know that it's fast and furious coming into our lives. But it's about educating us that those of us that can still humanize things, let's try and humanize the best as possible.
Okay, so such an interesting case, sorry, because actually one of the reasons why the population is so accepting of automation and robots and things like that is because they have a very different approach to being, as in human is it's a spiritual approach, right? So for most Japanese culturally, the world is full of spirits. So trees have spirits, robots have spirits, everything has a spirit within it. So from a Japanese perspective, there is no sharp distinction between humans and non-humans. It's all essentially the same. It's spirit, and I think that is something that it's an interesting theme to explore, because Japan is very anti-immigration, but then they can accept very highly automated, humanistic robots, that sort of thing, because of this sense, because of the spirituality. Whereas we don't have that sense of spirituality, or we have a very different sense of spirituality. So what we will accept is quite different. But then we're much more open to migration, which is a key element for having solved the demographic issues. I don't really have a point to make. I just think it's really interesting, the differences between Japan
we only solve that demographic problem by causing it somewhere else, don't we, Kylie? If people are coming in, if all of the young people are coming in from some other developing world to help us in our hospitals, then who's going to look after the old people there?
It's an argument.
It's definitely a highly complicated topic with many moving parts.
Yeah, and I also mentioned that. Sorry, I'll just mention in chat, what is it a binary choice, humans or machines? Because we may be actually potentially looking in the merging the two, like human living longer with the help of the machines. And as example of Japan, exactly the same what Chris has said popped in my mind immediately after we talked about elderly people, because we are humanizing machines there. It's a good example of how machines look and behave more and more like humans. So we're potentially looking at a situation when this distinction will be very blurry. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, but it's one of the possibilities.
Have a look at the series Ghost in the Shell. That would be my recommendation.
Regardless of the philosophy, yes, it's just an amazing series. So before we go too down the line into TV tips, what I'd like to do is, we're kind of coming up to time here, I'd like to do one last question of my own for all of you. I'll let you kind of interpret this as a way of looking at things from the way in which we choose to try to to create value, or the way in which we deal directly with people, because we've had quite a lot of, shall we say, the human connectivity points here. So one, and I'm going to say practical tip as opposed to an abstract tip from each of you as to how to say either go about making sure what we're doing is creating for value for people in the right way, or dealing with people directly. So like Chris, where you were talking about the guilds and the way in which you enable people through the guilds. So something like a concrete tip, within that area.
So my concrete tip is to really listen to people with humility.
Lovely, I like it. So who wants to go next?
I'll go next. Get people to automate what they want to automate.
Very nice. Okay. I'm going to pick on Victoria next.
Oh, I would say one of my biggest tips I would say is connect to your stillness. Just pause and think, because that's where the best ideas come from. Whether it's the best idea on automation or it's the best idea on humanization, in that stillness, you create absolute magic.
I think that's a very useful reminder. Yeah, there's a time to go and a time to pause. Elena.
I would say apply common sense, see things behind, apply the context. That's what I tell to students. Sometimes, when you look at the data, sometimes we're tempted, or when we look at solutions, sometimes we're tempted to go with the formal approach, and applying common sense, seeing the context probably would help to make better decisions.
Fantastic. Definitely something we need a lot more of in this world, is common sense, that's for sure. Kylie, would you like to provide your one?
Yeah, so as somebody who is very niche, very focused on IT asset management and process, I think for me is to take a step back and start re-evaluating what value means within our world. I think many of us have a very fixed idea of what value is, but actually, if we go out and we talk to people and ask them what brings value, and we ask those questions on their own terms, then I think we might find that the answers are quite different from what we expect.
Excellent point. I certainly have found that listening to Victoria's presentation. Your perspective on professional value and mine, at least where I am at the moment in my career, obviously quite different. And we've taken very different paths to come to those places. So yes, it's definitely very interesting listening to your perspective on that.
Have you got a tip for us, Richard?
So now I have to try and come up with one that you guys haven't already come up with.
Remember the context of where you are.
Find a way to give something back, I think will be mine. This is a tip I got from Robert, who was the chair before me of this group. And when he was recruiting me into the group, he said, you should do something. Yes. It doesn't matter what it is. You can join a group on the BCS, or you can go and volunteer. You say the food banks. I have friends who cook on the weekends for a charity in London, which hands out food to people. All of these kind of things. There's a time in life to focus on yourself, and there's a time in life to give something back. If you can keep a thought to that, I think that kind of hopefully dovetails in with all of your ideas there.
I love it. I love it.
So, and we've got in the chat here from Kylie. Does anyone else have any tips of their own? That's exactly where I was going to go at the end of this, Kylie. Is just to see, has anyone else in the audience got their own tip that they would like to add on to that? So I do appreciate we're giving that to you right at the last moment. So we will pause for a second to give you guys a chance to put something into the chat.
Can I just add as well, while people are putting in to your tip, Richard, that the whole giving back thing is so important, because that's where you reap your karmic rewards.
Yeah,
and if anybody doesn't know about that, they should read on it.
And I think it's something that we can do easily, because it doesn't have to be a big thing. You know, I have some of my colleagues who are doing this in very small ways on a daily basis, helping each other out. You know, and they're providing each other with support. They're helping each other in their developments, but they're making some humans' lives a little bit better, you know, and a bit more fruitful. So, okay, we have, thank you, Adele. So we've managed to tread water for just enough time to get our first one. I think this is a very first world perspective, and I think we should do another full day on this topic. Very interesting point, Adele. Yes, I think it is a very first world perspective, and now my mind is boggling as to how we can try and find a way to introduce, yeah. Unfortunately, most of my connections are unfortunately first world connections. My connections to other parts of the world are a bit more limited. But yeah, we'll certainly ponder on that, Adele, and see if we can find a way to bring that in. Maybe, Kylie, that's something we can bring in into our AGM, if we can get some feedback on that, or if not by then, next year's conference. Give us a little bit more breathing space on that. And a very good suggestion from Marilyn, perhaps Adele, to be one of the presenters. So well volunteered, Adele. We will be in touch if you are open to this, of course. Happy to. Excellent. Right. Thank you very much, Adele.
Well, maybe we should put together a little working group, because I'm sure Victoria has some thoughts on this as well. And I certainly have experience, although I lived in Indonesia and have Indonesian friends. So it'll be whatever we do will be the middle of the night for them.
Thanks for the nomination, Kylie.
Sorry, what was that?
So thanks for the nomination. I'd love to.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I think on that, that's our last point coming on the chat. So just as a wrap up then, I'd like to thank you all for coming back to make this session this evening possible. And thank you very much for your presentations. They certainly seem to get very good responses during the session, good engagement with people, and certainly having gone over the videos, I'm sure they'll be consumed well as we move forward. So certainly my experience when I've presented on online webinars is you get approximately 10 times the number of people who consume it within the month or so after it's happened to what you actually get live. And then for some reason to do with the recency of our information, which if you reference Elena's presentation, there's quite a good few slides on that. You know, it slides off a little bit. So thank you very much for your contributions. And Kylie,